everybody, welcome to this week's edition of the East-West Connection Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sig. This is KG. I'm pretty sure I got the pointing thing down after, what is this, week 12? I think we finally got
I think so. I think we got it. We kept changing it up on you, too, so.
Yeah, I'm going to keep you on your toes. Anyway, good night to get into our tag team edition. Unfortunately, as you all know by this point, Road Warrior Animal passed early last week. It's a total shame. For a while, we were doing real good. It seemed a couple of years back, we were losing some of our childhood heroes one after another. It seemed like we kind of leveled off and things kind of were a little bit normal when it came to early wrestler deaths. So it was a big thing, in the 2000s. And we're just losing guys too quick, whether it was steroids, drug abuse, whatever, what have you. It's a somber thing, and we certainly send our condolences and respects out for Road Warrior Animal's family and friends. But today's episode is going to be all about some of our favorite tag teams, some of our favorite tag team specialists, some of that kind of stuff. So, of course, the Road Warriors would be on top of both of our lists. KG, what were some of your thoughts on the Road Warriors throughout their run as a tag team, Hawk and Animal?
Well, I'll start with the actual Road Warriors rather than the Legion of Doom. I feel like although they were used somewhat to their potential in the early 90s, really where they made their name, and not a lot of people are familiar with them, and I'll be the first to admit it, guilty myself, the NWA stuff. It's kind of hard to believe that a tag team would actually have main event drawing power, but in the 80s, that's exactly what the Road Warriors were. If their name was on any card, they would sell out an arena. The numbers that they put up and of the amount of titles that they held would certainly put them in the conversation right at the top of the mountain as far as being the greatest tag team of all time. If you want to look at some of the other teams that were before them, but as far as and then their longevity too. I mean, they went right into the early 2000s. By that point, they kind of lost a little bit of
Sure.
what made them great is the fact that they were these big dudes that could work, and I think they got knocked for being a little sloppy at times and being a little not selling, but they also knew how to sell as well and knew when to sell.
Right.
And they just they put them in the rings with job guys and they'd throw them around. But I thought they for as a worker and technique, they knew what they were doing. They had their solid moves that they went to, their go-tos, and yeah, definitely one of the all-time greats, no question.
Yeah, I think really that was part of their gimmick was that they were just warriors. They weren't going to sell
Yeah,
for a clothesline or what have you because they
right.
didn't need to. That was their gimmick was they were just so over the top, such colorful characters. But no, I
And
agree.
probably the coolest finishing move ever, or at least at that time, for the longest time, the Doomsday Device. I mean, that was awesome.
That still holds up today. No, absolutely.
Hmm.
But just also a quick aside, if you're looking for the great story of the Road Warriors and some of that history of how they started up and being a tag team main event level guys, check out the Dark Side of the Ring. I think was from season 2. That was an awesome episode, and that'll really
Definitely.
fill you in on the Road Warrior story. But unfortunately, enough about those guys for now. We're gonna get into like I said at the top of the show, our favorite tag teams. We're also going to be looking at some of the other tag teams. Like I said, some of our personal favorites. This isn't going to be like a top 10 list or anything, but we're just going to run down probably like a little bit of a linear path of some of our tag teams and who we feel like really made a difference in the business. Also, along those lines, we were, in the Road Warriors era, that 80s, 90s era. We'd be remiss if we weren't talking about the British Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation. Obviously, a different style from the Road Warriors. They weren't the power guys, but these were, well, I guess with the Bulldogs, you kind of had a little mix of the power and the speed and technique. But and even with Jim Neidhart, I guess. So
Hmm.
disregard what I said there. But more of that technical style. But the Hart
Right.
Foundation and the Bulldogs were a great team. And then moving on to one of my personal favorites, the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, who he was a big Tully Blanchard fan. So I gotta, anybody who's a Tully fan, gotta give props there. But
Of course. Very influential.
for sure. But no, some of those guys, you put them in the ring against each other. In the case of the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation, instant classics. Or they can make another team look fabulous. So along that 80s and 90s era, I think those are some of the top tag teams. Any guys you want to throw in there, Cage?
I guess I'll start from the 80s. You got to look back to the Fabulous Freebirds. Of course, and you have to go back with Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express. Being a fan of the Cornet podcast, they actually did the biggest numbers as far as like selling out arenas.
Sure.
That feud, the Rock and Roll Express versus Midnight Express, and also throw LOD, or not LOD, but throw the Road Warriors in there, and they were huge. Obviously, if you go back before them, you talk about the Briscoes and Perez and Rocca, but that's going way back. We don't go that far back. But the Wild Samoans,
Yeah.
Alpha and Sika,
They're
of
great.
course the Von Erichs. You know what I mean? There's so many from the '80s that are just like, you know, uh, have to be mentioned.
Right, right. And another, this is more towards the later end of the 80s into the 90s, but the Steiner Brothers are probably one of my favorite tag teams of all time. They were another team that really combined both together, Rick and Scott, that power with finesse. They were both, they could both be technical if they needed to, but they had that powerhouse style. And then, later on, as we'd see, Scotty would just blow up for just being a powerhouse. But in his prime as young Scotty Steiner, he was an absolute workhorse. And I think the same could almost be said for Rick. He was probably the powerhouse of the two at the time, but for as a tag team, they brought legitimacy to that tag division. I think Rick brought Rick and Scott both brought an amateur style that was new and fresh to the tag scene. Throwing people around with the suplexes, that was something new at the time for them. And probably in my top five tag teams of all time, I was a big Steiner Brothers fan.
Yeah, me too. And WCW and WWF, they had a short run there. WrestleMania 9. Yeah, as we moved into the 90s, we have a lot of teams that need to be mentioned as well. You mentioned the Beverly Brothers. The Bushwhackers were a fun team to watch.
Sure.
Late 80s, early 90s. Then, of course, you get in the Attitude Era, and there's so many that you could mention. The Outlaws, the Hardys, and ECW, of course, there were so many great tag teams as well.
Right. Yeah. Glad you brought it into ECW a little bit. I always thought the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus, were super, maybe not underrated, but underappreciated. The fact that they never got a tag run in one of the big two. They were always like ECW's top tag team, and then mid '90s moving forward there. But I was always a huge Eliminators fan. I thought they brought a very unique, realistic style to their tag division. And of course, the Dudleys, they were just a legendary tag
Yeah,
team. Um, and the longevity there too. They both had a very stellar run as singles, then as a tag team, and then they kind of split off for a while. But the Dudleys were always a top tag team as well. So
definitely.
another one real quick. We just wanted to backtrack real quick. I'd be remiss anyways if I didn't bring up Axe and Smash Demolition. This also brings us back to the Road Warriors, who are kind of the central focal point of the show at this point. But a lot of people, there's the debate that the Demolition were a ripoff, a blatant ripoff of the Road Warriors. I didn't see it, but then again, growing up, I was a WWF fan first and foremost, so I knew Demolition before I knew the Road Warriors. So I may be biased in that. But really, I thought they were different enough gimmick, the face paint and the powerhouse style. That was really, I think, where the comparison ends. The S&M gear of Demolition was a little bit different than the chains and the I don't know. To me, it was different enough that I don't see a total rip-off comparison.
I
But
think it was
Demolition,
Vince's. I think it was Vince's attempt at the Road Warriors, but
sure,
in their style and their working, like I thought they were slightly better workers, but still kind of similar style.
yeah,
Um, but I think that was Vince's intention, but they definitely like morphed into their own thing, and they had
yeah,
their own way about them. And they
sure,
were proven stars almost by themselves before the Demolition
right,
as well.
right.
Singles competitors.
Yeah, and then some people could point to like the promo style, but it's just the two face painted dudes yelling into the camera, "Tell them Hawk, tell them Smash." But really,
Yeah,
I think that was everybody in the '80s. If you were a big powerhouse character, that was your promo style. It was just to yell into the camera and then finish off by telling your partner. So I don't. I see what you're saying, and I I wouldn't be able to disagree. However, to me, I think they were different enough characters, and like you said, it was a good point. They'd evolved into their own thing, especially with time. But no,
yeah,
that was it for me. For me in the '80s, that kind of wrapped up my faves, my go-to guys. Also mentioned the Attitude Era guys. I always thought Owen and the Bulldog were a great tag team. Davey Boy Smith. So really, he's going to get honorable mention in this, being part of the Bulldogs with Dynamite Kid, and then his work with Owen I thought was great because at that point Davey had kind of morphed into more of a powerhouse guy, and his technical ability may have been faltering by later on in his career. But Owen was going to pick up the pace on that end. So they were a great power meets finesse tag team. And really anything Owen Hart did was always phenomenal work. So those were my kind of go-tos for the Attitude Era. But also, be remiss if we didn't mention Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko. I thought those guys were underrated and never really got their due or their push that they deserved as a team together. In ECW, they had a quick run in Triple Threat, the original Triple Threat with Shane Douglas, and some great stuff there. Dean Malenko on his own is just an amazing, phenomenal talent. And Benoit, you could debate back and forth whether or not he tarnished his own legacy. But in ring, like we've said in the past on the show, in ring, there was no questioning Chris Benoit's talent. So together, I thought they were a great tag team as well. But yeah, I think the Eliminators and those, the Benoit and the Malenkos and the Dudleys, for the Attitude Era, that we call it the Attitude Era, but that late mid to late '90s era, I think those were the guys who kind of brought it all together.
Absolutely.
Any follow-up thoughts on some of those guys?
I guess in the '90s, I liked the style, and it was kind of the same style a little bit as a lot of the teams. But I don't know. I thought they had their own unique look about them, but they had the promo style. Was the Nasty Boys? I thought they were a fun tag team from that era. Also, a team that doesn't get enough recognition, I feel like, from the Attitude Era, and they even started before that, was Harlem Heat. They were like, I don't even know how many times they won the titles. They won the titles like 7, 8, 9 times. I don't even know. But they kept getting, they kind of got out of the tag team scene for a while, and they'd come back into the tag team scene for a while. But I really enjoyed Harlem Heat, Booker T, and Stevie Ray. The New Age Outlaws were fun. Their little mini feud that they had with Chainsaw Charlie and Cactus Jack was awesome.
Yeah,
And the Attitude Era, that's like very memorable time. As far as the Attitude Era goes, that was definitely a fun feud. But one team that you mentioned, one team that didn't get mentioned, and maybe not so deservingly, but that was more of a Road Warriors ripoff that I felt was the Powers of Pain. Like they looked exactly like the makeup was almost even similar. Like Demolition at least tried to have, they had totally different makeup. They didn't, Hawk and Animal only had like a portion of their face like painted or like this part, and Demolition had their whole face painted. Or like the Powers of Pain, the face paint looked almost exactly the same. But they were definitely not as polished in the ring. Certainly not the Warlord anyway, but jacked definitely and gassed to the gills, like the Road Warriors, no doubt about that.
Sure, definitely way more of that comparison could definitely be made for those two to be mirror images of each other than with Demolition. So good call, and also good call with Harlem Heat. They were an underrated staple of WCW's tag division for pretty much the entire 1990s. But yeah, moving forward, I think though that's all I had for really that Attitude Era, the mid to late '90s. Something that we don't really touch on too much here is Ring of Honor, and I really wanted to get into that because I felt like Ring of Honor in the 05, 06 era to about 2009 or 10, their tag division was just phenomenal. They probably had 5 or 6 different tag teams that you could call them the best tag teams in the world. I think you could put any combination of them together and you could just have phenomenal contests. I'm talking about teams like the Kings of Wrestling, Claudio Castagnoli, now we know him as Cesaro, and Chris Hero, or Cassius Ohno. However, you know these guys, when they were together as a tag team, they were just absolutely phenomenal. Brought that European style and Americanized it to just something out of this world. Go out of your way to see some of their stuff. The Briscoe brothers, not the original Briscoes that we had already mentioned, but Jay and Mark Briscoe, still active today in Ring of Honor, and sometimes more of singles stars now, just because they've had such longevity in their careers as well. But they're always a fallback for the tag division there. I have the Motor City Machine Guns, Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. I thought some of the stuff they did was pretty much revolutionary for that era of a tag team style. They were like a little bit of a throwback to what the Rock and Rolls and the Midnights were of their era, just in the continuity and the fluidity of tag team wrestling. The American Wolves, Eddie Edwards and Davey Richards, along those, and also Austin Aries and Roderick Strong. I thought those 5 teams, and then you throw them in with any other set of guys off that roster, and it was just a phenomenal time for tag team wrestling. So props to Ring of Honor and just the independent scene in general, really, for producing such top talent and such a great tag division. So
Yeah, they really put focus on their tag division for sure. And one team that should like really go down in the history books, and I feel like won't get as much recognition as they deserve because they've stayed in Ring of Honor the whole time and been loyal to Ring of Honor, are the Briscoes. Like you said, not the original Briscoes, Jack and Jerry, but Mark and Jay. Um, you know, they've been together for so long, had so many great matches, and still going strong now. We're talking almost 20 years now. Ring of Honor has been around, and they've just, you know, they just keep going. One team you mentioned that was the continuity and the high flying and all that stuff, like the Guns, that we didn't mention from the 90s, and we keep backtracking because there's so many great teams. You mentioned the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, but there was also the Midnight Rockers, later to become the Rockers in the WWF. The early 90s was just stacked with so
Yeah,
many great tag teams when you look back at it. Late
right.
80s, early 90s. So the Rockers I definitely throw in there. But that era, not just Ring of Honor, but around the same time period, there were some decent tag teams. In the WWE at the time as well. And one team that I really enjoyed, especially from a technical aspect, was the world's greatest tag team, Haas and Benjamin, whatever you want to call them. They were one
Absolutely.
of my favorite teams, and I feel like they weren't, I don't, for whatever reason, they got broken up like way too early. I mean,
Yep.
they were by far the best tag team that they had there. But there were some other good tags around that time. You had the Los Guerreros were around at that time.
Yep.
I think Benoit and Angle, Benoit and Jericho. There was just they had some guys that they just kind of threw together, but they knew how to work that tag team style as well. Kurt Angle, that whole group. You know, you can tag them
Sure.
with anybody, and they could do anything in the ring.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and since we're along those lines, we can point back to like the 2002 era of SmackDown, when Paul Heyman was first in charge, and people go back and they call him the SmackDown Six, which of course was Los Guerreros, Angle and Benoit, and or excuse me, Mysterio, Edge, and Angle and Benoit, and those
Yep.
six just would carry any show they were on. I believe Survivor Series '02 actually had the six together in a triple threat tag. I believe. Just phenomenal stuff. You could go back and watch pretty much any SmackDown from 2002 and find a good tag match because of those six guys. So no, you're absolutely right. That was a good time for tag wrestling. But unfortunately, that was around the time, and maybe a little bit before that the WWE just kind of went in and out with waves of whether or not they were ever going to push tag teams. Vince has always been a guy who saw more money in you as a singles. And take Bret Hart for instance. He saw more money in him as a single star than he saw as a tag team. Same with Shawn Michaels. Um, so just going back, I guess it goes back to the Booker's philosophy. If there's money to be made as tag team guys, of course, as we were just talking about in Ring of Honor, they absolutely saw money to be made in tag teams. The Ring of Honor tag titles had main evented almost just as many shows as the heavyweight title in that era, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. So, and unfortunately, current day, there are some good teams. You got your New Days and your Uso brothers, and things like that. But it just doesn't feel the same to me. You don't get that same. I don't know. It's just a different vibe with all of today's TV. That's no disrespect to any of those guys. And the New Day, they've been together now for probably almost going on 10 years. It doesn't seem like it, but they've been a solid unit. Whether it's Biggie and Kofi or Kofi and Xavier, however they team them up, there's still talent out there today. But it's not the same. I don't know. I don't really know how to put my it factor on it, but
Yeah.
and, but of course, and also just we keep going back, like you said, because there were so many. But Kevin Steen and El Generico, they were
Yeah.
one I
Definitely.
left out in that Ring of Honor group of dudes that
Absolutely.
you just put any of them together and you're going to get a phenomenal tag contest. So yeah,
Absolutely. I know you mentioned briefly the six man that you were talking about, or the three tag teams. We have
right,
to go back to the TLC, the early 2000s, WrestleMania 2000. Of
yep,
course, the famous TLC match with the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudleys. That's like an iconic match. And I'm not sure where Vince his head is at as far as with tag teams, because you mentioned Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, but they had been a tag team for years. You know what I mean? The world's greatest tag team. If you want to go back to that point, if that's the point you were trying to go off of, was like those guys. Neither one of those guys were Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels. Certainly not by that point. They weren't polished on the mic at all. They threw them together with Angle, Team Angle. I feel like because they didn't really have any personality. They were definitely great in ring workers. I think as they got a little bit better as time went on. But as we look at some of the new tag teams, I guess I would look at Undisputed, um, O'Reilly and Bobby Fish. Ring of Honor guys as well. But they would be one team that I would look at right now. And AEW is absolutely packed with really good tag team wrestling. For whatever reason, they felt like they needed to use two of their top single stars, however, and put them in a tag and draw out this long 6-month feud, which I don't think we actually ever got any clarity on that yet. And just to not put that tag team over, when you have a tag teams like the Lucha Brothers and even the Young Bucks, who are kind of the older balding Bucks now, but they have. Needless to say, they have so many good tag teams. Jurassic Express, or whatever you want to call them, Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus. They have a whole bunch of tag teams, but they haven't really used any of them. SCU, you know what I mean? Also, Christopher Daniels, another Ring of Honor guy. But yeah, I mean, there's so many tag teams I see in AEW, and to me, the Revival or whatever they're called now, like you said, they're not really money for me. They're the current tag team champions. With all those tag teams that I just mentioned, and I know there's a few that I forgot, Ortiz and Santana, or LAX, they were for a little while, the second version of them anyway. But yeah, they just can't seem to find their niche with tag team wrestling nowadays in any promotion, it seems like.
It's true. And it's unfortunate too, because as we've seen in the past, there is money to be made in tag team wrestling. It's different. It's a different style than what you get in a singles program. So I think if I was booking, and maybe we'll see this in a later episode with some fantasy booking stuff. But I'm a big tag team guy, so it's unfortunate to see the lack of it, or the lack of push for tag teams today.
Yeah.
But it's you get what you get. But like you said, AEW, they have the roster to have a great tag division, and I'm sure some of the matches are decent, but you also need that. I don't know. You need that style to mesh well with somebody else's style. The Lucha Brothers have more of that lucha style, less rules, so to speak, in that style of tag match. So it's I don't know, it's just hard to put together, but I don't know. That's the current day stuff. Like I said, sometimes I'm a little off the cuff on my opinions on that stuff. But looking back, we've seen some great tag teams in the past, and uh, that's what I got for this week's episode. Yeah, but really, I think that's gonna wrap it up for us here. Really, this is just wanted to put out a quick episode. The Road Warrior Animal stuff really was the preface for how why we wanted to do the tag team stuff tonight. So we may have been jumping around a little bit, but really we just want to pump out some content for you guys now that we have the new format. We're out of that Monday night era, Monday Night War stuff, at least for now. But if you guys have any suggestions on what you'd like to see us cover, or what kind of show you'd like to see, we're still open to suggestions. We may have a watch along or two coming up soon. We may even get back to that top 10 list, David Letterman style.
So if there's any tag teams we may have forgotten, some of your favorite tag teams, please give us a comment on Facebook. Please be sure to follow us on YouTube. We're also on Instagram. But for this week's edition of East West Connection Wrestling Podcast, this is KG.